2002 Delta RC Winter Series, 1st place. 2002 Dude Man Motors Dirt Oval Trophy Dash, 3rd place out of 21 trucks. 2003 Dual Under Diablo Stock Truck, 1st place. 7 individual race weekend wins, 4 individual race weekend 2nd place finishes, 7 individual race weekend 3rd place finishes, all with a Traxxas Rustler? Hey, it's me, Jang, from UltimateRC.com. So how did I do it? How did I beat low C double XTs and associated T3s in their time with a vehicle that all the racers said was good for only one thing, throwing in the garbage? Well, it's a combination of a few things. Definitely driving practice is a very important thing. Proper tire selection for a track, lightening up this vehicle. The Traxxas Rustler is very heavy compared to the competition racing vehicles of its time. All those things helped. But another thing that helped quite a lot was suspension tuning, knowing how to set up the vehicle to handle properly on a given track. So this series of videos, Suspension 101, is going to go into some of the basic concepts of how suspension works on an RC vehicle. I'll show you how to do some basic tuning with very simple tools for a given vehicle, for a given set of conditions. And I'll also try to correct some very common misconceptions about how to tune and what effects different components of suspension have on the overall handling of the vehicle. Now, this is a fairly typical suspension layout that you'll see on an RC vehicle. This happens to be an off-road vehicle, which I actually picked because the components are much larger and much more obvious and easy to point out. But you'll find that even on-road vehicles have a very similar overall layout, and the concepts all still apply. The main things that you'll think of when you think of suspension will usually be shocks and springs, and then there are the suspension arms down here along the bottom, which actually hold onto some components at the end, which ultimately hold the wheel. And then you have a couple of sets of links. In this case, we've got links on the top going right across here. Those are called camber links. And then because we're looking at the front of the vehicle, we also have some links down lower, which are your steering links. Those are what cause the tires and wheels to turn, which allows you to steer. I'm going to start off by focusing on just these things that are called shocks. A lot of people would point at either of these and say, well, that's the shock, but that's actually not the case. This is a shock plus a spring each side. Now, shock and spring sets come in a variety of sizes and shapes. Here I've got ones that are made for 1/8 scale larger vehicle all the way down to a 1/18 scale vehicle. Now, to show you what I meant about the shocks and the springs being separate, I'm just going to pick out one of these, a fairly common 1/10 scale off-road shock like you would have seen on that truck that I'm using for the cutaway. And I'm just going to take a couple components of it off. This here obviously is the spring. Has nothing to really do with the shock itself. It could be installed on the vehicle completely separate, but this is the shock. Now, the spring is what really holds up the vehicle and also helps to prevent it from leaning over in turns. The shock doesn't hold up the vehicle at all. All the shock is there to do is to dampen the rate at which the suspension compresses and extends. So if you go over a bump, the purpose of this shock is to make it so that instead of that bump being really sudden and really forceful, it becomes more soft and more easy so that the suspension can return to where it's supposed to be without creating a whole lot of bounciness. So even though this truck is actually running a full set of shocks and springs at all 4 corners, I've actually basically deactivated the shocks in the back. So physically the shocks are there, but the internal stuff has been changed so that the vehicle is working as if the shocks aren't there, and it's just using the springs. So this is what a vehicle behaves like when it has essentially no shocks and just springs. I'm just gonna give it a tap. See how it bounces? Now, these springs are actually about the correct rate to run on this vehicle depending on the terrain. But with no shocks, it's just really bouncy. There's no what's called damping or dampening action, which is reducing the bounciness and converting some of that motion into heat to slow it down and prevent the rebound and all this bouncing from occurring. Now, to show you a little bit more of how that works and help you to understand how a shock or a shock absorber works, I'm going to turn it around to the other side. And here I have a shock that's been cut open so you can see exactly how it's going to work on the inside. So this is the most common type of shock or damper that you'll find on an RC today. This is called an oil shock, and I'll show you the reason that they call it an oil shock in just a second. Basically what I've done here is I've cut the whole thing open, including removing some of the springs so that you can focus on just the shock absorber portion itself and see what's on the inside and see how it works when it's moving. So first of all, a little bit of terminology. The outer portion, the outer sleeve of the shock is called the cylinder. The metal rod that sticks down from the shock and goes down to the suspension arm to basically connect to the moving part of the suspension is called the shaft, the shock shaft. And then inside of there, as I move this, you'll see that the shaft is actually attached to one more piece deep down inside, which is called the piston. And it's generally when you're looking at how shocks work, people look at it from the perspective of the vehicle staying steady as it goes over bumps and the suspension is moving. So it's the shaft that's moving inside and the piston that's attached to it. Now you can see the piston on the shaft a little bit more closely. You can see how it's sliding inside of there. Now it's really difficult to point to something so small on camera, especially given that it's black and shadows are black too. But right down in here, there's a hole in this piston. And to help illustrate this a little bit better, I'm just going to show you a couple of pistons by themselves. So this is a shock piston. This is exactly what you're looking at right here, taken out of a shock. And you can see on the side, there's one of those holes I was talking about. The main big hole in the center is to mount it over the shaft, but over on the side there's one hole, and you can get them in different designs. So this one actually has 3 holes, but basically what's going to happen is that this center hole is completely covered up by the mounting of the shaft in there. But the small holes around the side, however many there are, allow fluid to pass through. This entire space inside of the shock cylinder, both above and below, would be filled with oil. It's a specific type of oil that's called silicone oil that comes in very specific weights or very specific levels of thickness. So the piston is actually going to be completely submerged in this silicone oil. And as the suspension acts and as the piston moves up and down, or as the entire vehicle moves and the piston is stuck in one place, the oil is forced to move from top to bottom or from bottom to top. So as the suspension compresses, for instance, right now most of the oil is up here and only a little bit is on the bottom. But as the suspension compresses, oil is forced from the top down into the bottom to go through those small tiny little holes. What that does is it creates a lot of resistance, a lot of basically friction that converts some of that motion into heat. It dissipates it. So that's actually force that's basically being turned into nothingness. It's no longer a physical force that's acting on the vehicle. And the end result of that, moving to the front of the vehicle, so this is with a fully functioning shock now. This shock is filled with the proper silicone oil. So now when I push on this, you can see it's a very soft and smooth action that occurs from. So that's the effect of a shock absorber, is it takes out that bounciness and helps to prevent the suspension from moving too quickly.